What happens when the CEO of an airline uncovers a web of lies within her own company? Betrayal, high-stakes decisions, and a fight for truth that could change the aviation industry forever. But will the price of justice be too high? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The late afternoon sun bore down on the sprawling expanse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Heat waves shimmered above the asphalt of the multi-level parking garage, reflecting the golden rays of a summer Friday. The hum of activity filled the air, suitcases rolling over uneven pavement, car horns blaring as taxis jostled for position in long queues, and the faint rhythmic roar of planes departing in the distance. It was a familiar chaos, one that millions of travelers pass through every year. Olivia Bennett stepped out of the air-conditioned terminal and into the muggy warmth of the parking lot. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored black pants, she carried herself with an air of understated confidence. Her soft curls framed a face that was serene but unyielding, her deep brown eyes scanning the rows of vehicles with purpose. She didn't have an entourage or a chauffeur waiting to whisk her away. That wasn't her style. Instead, Olivia wheeled her suitcase, a sleek black carry-on with scuff marks betraying years of global travel, toward a modest sedan parked on the third level. This was Olivia Bennett, CEO of Skyline Airways, and though she held one of the most powerful positions in the aviation industry, she preferred simplicity and self-reliance. As she reached her car, she noticed it, a shift in the atmosphere. A group of 4 uniformed pilots loitered near a shiny black SUV a few spaces down, their conversation peppered with loud laughter. They wore the navy blue jackets and golden insignia of Skyline Airways, her company. Olivia hesitated for a moment, her hand on the trunk of her car. She wasn't one to eavesdrop, but their voices carried across the open space with little regard for discretion. "Look at her," one of them said, his tone dripping with condescension. It was Mark, a senior captain with an ego as oversized as the sunglasses perched on his face. "She probably works in baggage claim, or maybe she's lost and can't figure out where she parked." The others laughed. "Or she's trying to hustle tips out here," Stephen added, leaning casually against the SUV with a smirk. "Should we toss her a few bucks?" Rachel, the only woman in the group, chuckled but didn't add anything. Kevin, the youngest of the 4, tried to suppress a grin but failed miserably. It was clear none of them suspected the woman they were mocking was the CEO of their employer. Olivia's grip on her suitcase tightened. Her initial instinct was to ignore them. Years of navigating boardrooms and battling systemic bias had taught her the power of restraint. But as Mark's voice rose again, this time mocking her appearance, she decided to respond. Calmly, Olivia turned to face the group, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp, cutting through the space between them. "Thank you for the observation," she said evenly, her voice laced with a calm firmness that demanded attention. "I'll make sure it's remembered." For a moment, the pilots were caught off guard, their smug grins faltering as they registered her tone. But Mark, ever the instigator, quickly recovered. He crossed his arms and chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Oh, we're just being honest," he said, tilting his head slightly as if to size her up. "Maybe a little gratitude wouldn't hurt. Not everyone gets to be around people who actually fly planes for a living." Stephen laughed, leaning forward with a mockingly sympathetic expression. "Yeah, I mean, it must be tough doing whatever it is you do. Cleaning cabins, handling baggage, either way, it's honest work." His voice dripped with condescension, every word designed to sting. Olivia stood her ground, her posture unwavering despite the barrage of words. But Mark wasn't finished. "Or maybe she's trying to figure out how to get hired," he said, his grin widening. "Sorry, sweetheart, I think you missed your chance. Pretty sure Skyline isn't hiring, you know, entry-level staff right now." The laughter from the group grew louder, each word piling on like a weight. Even Rachel, the only woman among them, smirked as she added, "Don't let them get to you. Everyone has to start somewhere, right? Maybe next time, aim for something behind the scenes." Olivia's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the handle of her suitcase, her knuckles whitening for a split second before she released the tension. Inside, she felt the familiar surge of anger, the kind she had spent years learning to control. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, belittled, or outright insulted. But here, in the parking lot of the company she had built into an industry leader, the sting cut deeper. Still, she refused to let them see it. Her voice remained steady as she replied, her words slicing through their laughter like a blade. It's always enlightening to hear what people think when they assume no one's listening. Thank you for being so candid. Mark raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. Oh, we're always candid, he said with a smirk. Just trying to keep things real. Olivia let his words hang in the air, her calm demeanor unshaken. She glanced briefly at the Skyline logo emblazoned on their uniform jackets, a sharp reminder of the responsibility she carried as the head of this company. Without another word, she turned back to her car, opened the trunk, and carefully placed her suitcase inside. As she slid into the driver's seat, she caught one last glimpse of the group through her side mirror. They were still laughing, their arrogance unbroken, completely oblivious to the storm they had just set in motion. Olivia's jaw tightened as she started the engine, the hum of the car a quiet counterpoint to the voices that still rang in her ears. They didn't know who she was, and for now that was fine. They would learn soon enough. As she merged onto the highway, her mind churned. The words they had spoken were familiar, echoes of countless dismissals and slights she had endured throughout her career. But what gnawed at her more was the realization that these people represented her company, Skyline Airways. These weren't strangers on the street. They were part of the organization she had worked tirelessly to build, the brand she had shaped around respect, integrity, and opportunity. The Atlanta skyline loomed ahead, a mosaic of steel and glass bathed in the warm hues of sunset. Olivia's expression remained calm, but her thoughts sharpened. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something larger, a culture within her company that had festered unnoticed. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, interrupting her thoughts. Glancing at the screen, she saw the name Maria Alvarez, her trusted assistant and confidant. Olivia hesitated for a moment before picking up. Maria, she said, her tone steady but tinged with weariness. Welcome back, Olivia. Maria's voice was warm but professional. How was the trip? It was productive, Olivia replied, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. But something happened at the airport today. I'll need you to pull some files for me when I get to the office tomorrow. Maria didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Of course, she said simply. I'll have everything ready. As Olivia ended the call, she felt a flicker of resolve ignite within her. This wasn't just about addressing a group of rude employees. It was about ensuring that Skyline Airways lived up to the values she had fought so hard to establish. The evening sky deepened, and the city lights began to shimmer. Olivia's car sped toward the heart of Atlanta, her mind already formulating the first steps of what she knew would be a difficult but necessary battle. The sound of her heels against the marble floors echoed softly as Olivia walked into Skyline Airways headquarters the next morning. The office, located in the heart of downtown Atlanta, occupied an entire floor of a sleek glass tower that overlooked the city skyline. The space was pristine, every corner reflecting the company's commitment to excellence. But today, the usual air of accomplishment felt heavy, weighed down by the events of the previous evening. Olivia entered her office, a spacious yet modestly designed room adorned with carefully chosen elements. A shelf displayed awards recognizing Skyline's achievements in safety and innovation, while a framed photograph of her parents stood proudly on her desk. It was a reminder of where she came from, a working-class family in Birmingham, Alabama, who had sacrificed everything to give her a shot at a better life. Sinking into her leather chair, Olivia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Her mind replayed the scene at the parking lot, the smug expressions, the careless words. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such blatant disrespect. Growing up as a young black girl in the Deep South, she'd learned early on that people often judge before they understood. She could still hear her mother's voice from decades ago. Don't let them see you break, Olivia. Hold your head high even when it feels heavy. And she had. Time after time, Olivia had persevered, earning scholarships, excelling in a male-dominated industry, and ultimately becoming one of the few black women to lead a major corporation. Yet even now, standing at the pinnacle of her career, moments like yesterday reminded her how far society still had to go. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the Atlanta skyline. Part of her wanted to dismiss the incident as just another case of ignorance, another battle in a long war. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about her. Those pilots represented Skyline, her company. Their behavior wasn't just a personal affront. It was a reflection of something broken within the organization. Her intercom buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. "Ms. Bennett," Maria's voice came through, calm and efficient as always. "The board meeting is set for 10 a.m. Everyone has confirmed attendance." "Thank you, Maria," Olivia replied. She paused for a moment before adding, "Also, can you pull the personnel files for all pilots in the Atlanta base? Focus on those with seniority." There was a brief silence before Maria responded. "Of course. I'll have everything ready for you before the meeting." Olivia ended the call and exhaled slowly. This was the first step, understanding who she was dealing with and ensuring Skyline's standards were being upheld. By the time the meeting began, Olivia had regained her composure. She entered the conference room with the same quiet authority that had become her trademark. The room, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, was filled with Skyline's senior leadership and key department heads. Among them were Mark and his group, seated casually at one end of the table. Mark leaned back in his chair, exuding the same air of arrogance Olivia had witnessed at the parking lot. He exchanged whispers with Stephen, who chuckled under his breath. Neither showed any sign of recognizing Olivia, and their body language was anything but professional. "Good morning, everyone," Olivia began, her tone firm but measured. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "Before we proceed with the agenda, I'd like to address an issue that has recently come to my attention," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Our reputation as an organization rests on the professionalism and integrity of every single employee, from the ground crew to the cockpit. It has come to my attention that these values may not be universally upheld." Mark shifted slightly in his seat, his expression tightening ever so subtly. "As such," Olivia went on, "I've requested a thorough review of our personnel files to ensure that all employees meet Skyline's standards, not just in qualifications, but in conduct." A murmur rippled through the room. Olivia's tone left no room for misinterpretation. Mark raised his hand, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "With all due respect, Ms. Bennett, are we being put under a microscope because of a few isolated complaints? Seems a bit excessive." Olivia met his gaze without flinching. "If you have nothing to hide, Captain Andrews, then this process shouldn't concern you," she replied smoothly. The tension in the room was palpable. Mark leaned back again, his smirk fading slightly as he realized he wasn't dealing with someone who could be easily dismissed. By the time the meeting concluded, Olivia had made one thing clear. The days of complacency were over. As the attendees filed out, Mark exchanged a glance with Stephen, a hint of unease creeping into his confident demeanor. Back in her office, Olivia reviewed the preliminary reports Maria had compiled. Names, dates, certifications, all laid out in meticulous detail. It didn't take long for patterns to emerge, and Olivia's suspicions began to solidify. This wasn't just about arrogance or ignorance. There were deeper issues at play, ones that would require careful navigation. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across her desk, Olivia felt the weight of what lay ahead. But instead of discouragement, she felt something else: resolve. Maria Alvarez sat at her desk in the corner office, adjacent to Olivia's, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she combed through a maze of digital files. The pale glow of her monitor reflected on her glasses, highlighting her focused expression. Maria had been Olivia's right-hand confidant for the past 7 years, a role she approached with both loyalty and diligence. The office hummed with the soft murmur of activity, but Maria's thoughts were singularly focused on Olivia's request from the morning. Personnel records were the kind of task she excelled at, painstakingly meticulous and requiring an eye for patterns others might overlook. Maria's desk phone buzzed softly. "Maria, can you step into my office?" Olivia's voice was calm but carried a note of urgency. Maria grabbed her notepad and stepped into Olivia's office, where the CEO sat behind her desk, her expression pensive but resolute. "Close the door, please," Olivia said. Maria complied, her curiosity piqued. Olivia wasn't one to mince words, so the formality of the request meant something significant was at hand. "Maria," Olivia began, leaning forward slightly. Something happened at the airport yesterday. Maria listened intently as Olivia recounted the incident in the parking lot, her words measured but laced with frustration. When she described the comments made by the pilots, Maria's brows furrowed in disbelief. "They didn't realize who you were?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with both shock and indignation. "They didn't care to find out," Olivia replied, her tone even. "And that's the problem. This wasn't just about me. It was about what they represent and what they think they can get away with." Maria nodded slowly. "That's unacceptable, Olivia. If this is how they behave in public, I can only imagine what happens behind closed doors." "That's why I need you," Olivia said. "We need to dig deeper. I have a feeling this isn't the first time they've crossed a line." Maria's mind was already racing. "I'll start with their personnel files," she said. "Certifications, disciplinary records, anything that might raise a red flag." "Good," Olivia said. She paused, her gaze softening for a moment. "Thank you, Maria. I know this won't be easy, but I trust you to handle it." Maria smiled faintly. "You know I've got your back. Always." Over the next few hours, Maria dove into her work with unrelenting focus. She sifted through digital records, cross-referenced dates, and flagged discrepancies. It didn't take long for the first inconsistencies to appear. "Olivia," Maria said, stepping into the CEO's office with a folder in hand. "You need to see this." Olivia looked up from her desk, gesturing for Maria to sit. "Mark Andrews," Maria began, opening the folder. "His certification records don't match the dates on his personnel file. There's a 6-month gap between when he supposedly completed his flight hours and when he was hired." Olivia frowned. "That's odd. What about the others?" "Stephen and Rachel's files are clean," Maria continued. "But Kevin, the newest member of their group, has incomplete records for his last round of safety training. He shouldn't have been cleared to fly." Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind piecing together the puzzle. "This isn't just carelessness. Someone's been covering for them." Maria nodded. "That's what I'm starting to suspect. And there's more." She handed Olivia another sheet of paper. "These are internal complaints filed against the group. Most of them are for unprofessional behavior, condescending attitudes toward junior staff, inappropriate comments. But none of them went anywhere. Every complaint was marked as resolved with no further action." Olivia's jaw tightened. "Who signed off on these resolutions?" Maria hesitated. "That's the thing. There's no clear record. It's almost as if the complaints were deliberately buried." Olivia stared at the document, her thoughts a storm of frustration and determination. "This can't continue," she said finally. "We need to find out who's protecting them and why." The air in the office grew heavier with the weight of unspoken implications. This wasn't just about a few bad apples. It was about a culture of complicity that had taken root within Skyline. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, Olivia and Maria exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The road ahead would be difficult, but neither of them was willing to back down. The conference room buzzed with quiet murmurs as Skyline's team of pilots filtered in. The space, normally reserved for leadership meetings, now held a broader audience. Dozens of captains and first officers, including the 4 familiar figures from the parking lot incident. Olivia stood near the head of the long glass table, her expression composed but unreadable. She had called this meeting without much notice, leaving speculation to fill the gaps in silence. Mark strolled in last, flanked by Stephen, Rachel, and Kevin. His confidence was palpable, each step deliberate, as though he were walking onto a stage. He exchanged a glance with Stephen, smirking as he settled into a chair directly across from Olivia. If he was surprised to see her, he didn't show it. Olivia began without preamble. "Thank you all for coming. I wanted to address an important issue that directly impacts our company's reputation and operational standards." Her voice was calm but carried an edge that silenced the room. Eyes turned toward her, some attentive, others indifferent. Mark leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, the picture of feigned nonchalance. "Skyline Airways has built its reputation on professionalism and integrity," Olivia continued. "These values aren't optional. They're the foundation of who we are as an organization and what our passengers expect from us." The tension in the room began to thicken. A few pilots shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. Others remained still, their gazes locked on Olivia. But lately, Olivia said, pausing for emphasis, there have been instances that call these values into question. I won't name names yet, but I will say this. Behavior that undermines respect, safety, or professionalism will not be tolerated. Mark's smirk widened as he sat up slightly, his voice cutting through the silence. With all due respect, Ms. Bennett, this feels a bit vague. If you have something to say, perhaps you should say it outright. All eyes turned to him, a ripple of unease spreading through the room. Olivia met his gaze, her expression unflinching. This isn't about singling out individuals, she replied evenly. It's about setting a standard that applies to everyone, no matter their rank or tenure. Mark chuckled softly, shaking his head. Standards are fine in theory, but we all know the realities of this industry. Pilots are under constant pressure, long hours, unpredictable schedules. You can't expect perfection. Perfection isn't the goal, Olivia countered, but accountability is. The room fell silent again, the tension almost tangible. Mark leaned forward, his tone shifting to something more combative. Let's be honest, Ms. Bennett. You're asking for something that doesn't align with how things actually work. You're trying to impose ideals that aren't practical for people in the cockpit. Several pilots looked down at their hands, unwilling to get involved. Stephen nodded slightly, offering a murmur of agreement. Olivia, however, stood firm. Practicality doesn't excuse misconduct, she said, her voice steady. If anyone here feels they can't uphold Skyline's values, they're welcome to step away. But as long as you wear that uniform, those values are non-negotiable. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a thinly veiled glare. Easy to say from where you're sitting, he muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. The air grew heavier, charged with the weight of unspoken challenges. Olivia let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. This isn't a negotiation, she said finally. It's a reminder. And let me be clear. Any deviations from our standards will be addressed directly. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Mark pushed his chair back slightly, crossing his arms as he stared at her. We'll see, he said, his tone laced with defiance. The meeting ended shortly after, the pilots dispersing in uneasy silence. As the room cleared, Mark lingered, exchanging a few quiet words with Stephen before walking out. Olivia remained at the head of the table, watching them leave with an expression that revealed nothing. As the door closed behind the last of them, Olivia exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Mark's arrogance wasn't just a personal affront. It was a sign of deeper issues within the organization. But she wasn't deterred. If anything, his defiance had strengthened her resolve. She moved to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline, the city bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm and unyielding. This was only the beginning, and Olivia knew she couldn't afford to back down. The early morning sunlight streamed into Olivia's office, illuminating the meticulously arranged space. She sat at her desk, her laptop open and her focus unwavering. After the contentious meeting with the pilots, Olivia knew that merely issuing warnings wouldn't suffice. The issue was deeper, and if Skyline Airways was to maintain its integrity, she needed concrete evidence to dismantle the culture of entitlement that had begun to fester. Maria entered the office, a stack of folders in her arms and her face set with determination. I've got the initial reports you requested, she said, placing the files neatly on Olivia's desk. There's already enough here to raise serious questions. Olivia nodded, gesturing for Maria to sit. Walk me through what you found. Maria opened the first folder. Mark Andrews, senior pilot, over 15 years with the company. His certifications are valid on the surface, but I noticed discrepancies when I cross-checked the training records. He logged simulator hours that overlap with a documented international flight he piloted. That's physically impossible. Olivia's eyes narrowed. So the records were falsified? Maria nodded. And he's not the only one. Kevin's safety training files were incomplete, as we already suspected, but it goes deeper. He was cleared for flights despite failing key evaluations during his probationary period. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. This isn't just carelessness. Someone is actively covering for them. Maria hesitated before continuing. There's more. I looked into prior incidents involving this group. A minor mechanical failure during one of Mark's flights was quietly swept under the rug last year. The official report blamed a faulty component, but the maintenance logs suggest it was due to improper handling during landing. Olivia sat forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Who signed off on these reports? That's where it gets murky, Maria said. The signatures are electronic, and the trail leads back to someone in middle management. It's hard to say if they were complicit or just following orders. Olivia exhaled sharply, her resolve hardening. Maria, I need you to keep digging. Coordinate with legal, quietly. If there's a systemic issue here, we're going to root it out. Understood, Maria said. I'll keep this as discreet as possible. Hours later, Olivia summoned Mark for a private meeting in her office. When he arrived, he wore the same smug expression she had come to associate with him. He sauntered in, hands in his pockets, and took a seat without being asked. You wanted to see me? He said, his tone casual. Olivia didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mark, I've been reviewing some of your records, and there are inconsistencies I need you to explain. Mark's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. I don't know what you're referring to, but my record speaks for itself. I've been with Skyline for years. If there were any issues, someone would have flagged them by now. Olivia placed a folder on the desk and opened it to reveal the evidence Maria had compiled. Your simulator hours overlap with flights you were logged as piloting? Care to explain how that's possible? Mark's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. There must be a mistake in the system. These things happen. Olivia leaned forward, her tone firm. This isn't a clerical error, Mark, and it's not just your records. There's a pattern here, one that suggests negligence at best and deliberate fraud at worst. Mark's expression darkened. Are you accusing me of something, Ms. Bennett? Because if you are, you'd better have more than just paperwork. This isn't an accusation, Olivia said, her voice icy. It's a warning. I will not tolerate behavior that endangers this company or the lives of our passengers. If you have any part in this, now is the time to come clean. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. If you want to drag my name through the mud, go ahead. But I've done nothing wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about, Olivia replied calmly. But I suggest you tread carefully. This isn't going away. Mark stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Olivia watched him leave, her expression betraying no emotion. She knew his reaction was a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to deflect. The question was how deep the rot went, and how many people were involved. That evening, as the office emptied and the city lights began to twinkle outside her window, Maria returned with another folder. Her face was serious, her usual calm replaced by a sense of urgency. This just came in from legal, Maria said, handing the folder to Olivia. It's worse than we thought. Olivia opened it and scanned the contents. The documents outlined a trail of negligence and cover-ups, including emails that hinted at collusion between certain pilots and a few members of the management team. At the bottom of the stack was a maintenance report tied to a flight Mark had piloted, detailing an incident that had been deliberately omitted from the official log. Olivia closed the folder slowly, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about a culture of complacency that had been allowed to grow unchecked. She stood, holding the folder tightly in her hands. It's time to bring this to light, she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. We're going to fix this, no matter how deep it goes. Maria sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and an array of open files spread across her workspace. The hum of the office around her was a distant murmur as she scrolled through a series of internal emails. She had spent the better part of 2 days piecing together the connections Olivia had tasked her to investigate. Each lead, each flagged inconsistency, seemed to point to something larger, something far more troubling than they had initially anticipated. Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her from her intense focus. Olivia's name lit up on the screen. Maria, Olivia's voice was calm but urgent. Do you have an update? I do, Maria replied, her tone carefully measured. But you're going to want to hear this in person. Can you meet me in my office? On my way, Olivia said without hesitation. A few minutes later, Olivia entered, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Maria, her expression expectant but composed. What have you found? She asked. Maria gestured to the papers in front of her. I started with Mark's records, but as I dug deeper, I noticed something strange. Several of the flagged inconsistencies in his file were signed off by the same person, David Langston. Olivia's brows furrowed. Langston? He's been with Skyline for over 20 years. He oversees compliance, doesn't he? That's correct, Maria said, handing Olivia a printed email. But it gets worse. I found this exchange between Langston and Mark from about a year ago. It's vague, but it clearly references a mutual understanding regarding training certifications. And this wasn't the only email. There's a trail of communication that suggests Langston has been covering for Mark, and potentially others, for years. Olivia scanned the email, her expression hardening with every passing second. This isn't just negligence, she said quietly. This is deliberate. Maria nodded. And if Langston is involved, it means the issue isn't confined to the pilots. It's systemic. He's been enabling this behavior, possibly for his own benefit. The weight of the discovery settled heavily between them. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The implications were staggering. Langston was a senior member of her leadership team, someone who had been with the company longer than she had. If he was complicit, the damage extended far beyond the actions of a few rogue pilots. This changes everything, Olivia murmured. It does, Maria agreed. And it raises a question. How much are you willing to reveal? Because if this goes public, it won't just be Mark and his group under scrutiny. It'll be the entire leadership structure of Skyline. Olivia didn't respond immediately. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. The skyline stretched out before her, a reminder of the heights she had worked so hard to reach. But now that success felt precarious, like a fragile glass tower, waiting for the first crack to spread. Maria's voice broke the silence. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what's at stake, Olivia said, her tone reflective. The company's reputation, our employees' livelihoods, the trust of our passengers. If I bring this to light, it could shake the foundation of everything we've built. But if you don't, Maria said gently, it'll fester. And the next time something like this happens, it might not end with a near miss. It could be catastrophic. Olivia turned back to face her. You're right. This isn't just about protecting Skyline's image. It's about protecting its integrity and the people who rely on us to do what's right. Maria nodded, sensing the shift in Olivia's resolve. Schedule a meeting, Olivia said firmly. I want every member of the leadership team in the boardroom tomorrow morning. It's time we address this head on. Maria grabbed her notepad and stood. I'll handle it. Anything else? Yes, Olivia said, her gaze steady. Make sure legal is ready. If Langston or anyone else tries to deny involvement, we need to be prepared. As Maria left to make the arrangements, Olivia sat back down at her desk, her hands resting on the folder that contained the damning evidence. Her decision was made, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. She knew that exposing Langston's complicity could create ripple effects she couldn't fully predict, but she also knew that doing nothing would be far worse. The room was quiet now, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the encroaching dusk. Olivia glanced at the clock, noting the late hour, but she felt no fatigue. Instead, she felt a calm determination, a readiness to face whatever came next. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. The conference room buzzed with tension as Olivia entered, a thick folder clutched tightly in her hand. The air was heavy, punctuated only by the faint rustling of papers and the low murmur of side conversations among Skyline Airways' leadership team. Seated around the long, polished table were faces she had known for years, some allies, others skeptics. At the far end sat David Langston, his demeanor as calm and unbothered as ever. Olivia took her place at the head of the table, her expression composed yet resolute. She surveyed the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough to command everyone's attention. Thank you all for being here on such short notice, she began, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. What I'm about to share concerns the integrity of this company and the principles it was built upon. I won't mince words. What we've uncovered is serious. She placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing copies of emails, training records, and incident reports. With each document she laid out, the atmosphere grew more charged. Over the past several weeks, Olivia continued, it's come to my attention that certain individuals within this organization have engaged in practices that not only violate our standards, but also jeopardize the safety of our passengers and the reputation of Skyline Airways. A murmur rippled through the room. Langston's face remained impassive, but his fingers tapped lightly against the armrest of his chair. Olivia picked up one of the documents and held it aloft. This email exchange, for example, shows direct communication between a senior pilot and a member of this very leadership team. Communication that indicates deliberate efforts to falsify training records and bypass safety protocols. The room erupted. Voices overlapped as some members expressed shock, while others exchanged nervous glances. Langston finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. "Olivia," he said, leaning forward slightly, "these are serious accusations. Are you certain about the validity of this information?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I wouldn't bring it to this table if I wasn't," she replied, "and I intend to ensure that every detail is verified. That's why I've already consulted with our legal team." Langston's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Another voice broke in. "Gregory Shaw, the head of operations. Look, I think we all agree that if there's been misconduct, it needs to be addressed. But dragging this out into the open could do irreparable damage to the company. We need to think carefully about how we proceed." "Carefully," Olivia echoed, her tone sharpening. "Gregory, this isn't about protecting the company's image. It's about protecting its integrity. If we ignore this now, we're setting a precedent that we value appearances over accountability. Is that the message we want to send?" The room fell silent, save for the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Langston cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "perhaps we should consider handling this internally. There's no need to escalate things to external authorities until we've conducted our own investigation." Olivia's gaze hardened. "An internal investigation won't be enough, not when there's evidence that members of this leadership team were complicit in covering up these violations." Langston stiffened, his composed facade slipping for just a moment. The tension in the room became almost unbearable as Olivia let her words hang in the air. "This isn't just about a few bad actors," she continued. "It's about a culture that's allowed these actions to go unchecked. And as CEO, it's my responsibility to root that culture out, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us." The room descended into chaos. Voices rose as some members argued for caution, while others supported Olivia's stance. Langston attempted to regain control, his voice cutting through the noise. "Olivia, you're taking this too far," he said, his tone tinged with frustration. "We've built this company on trust and collaboration. Airing our dirty laundry like this will only destroy what we've worked so hard to build." Olivia stood, her hands resting firmly on the table as she looked directly at him. "What destroys a company isn't accountability, David. It's the lack of it. And I won't allow Skyline Airways to be destroyed by a failure to act." The room fell silent once more. Olivia straightened, her gaze sweeping across the table. "Here's how we're moving forward," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "All relevant evidence will be handed over to the appropriate authorities. Skyline Airways will conduct a comprehensive internal investigation with the oversight of an independent third party. And every individual involved in these violations, no matter their position, will be held accountable." Her words hung in the air like a verdict, final and inescapable. "Furthermore," Olivia continued, "I'm issuing a directive to revamp our compliance protocols and establish stricter oversight mechanisms. This company will no longer tolerate negligence or corruption at any level." Langston's face was a mask of barely concealed anger, but he said nothing. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of resignation and concern. The meeting concluded soon after, the leadership team dispersing in uneasy silence. Olivia remained behind, standing by the window and gazing out at the city below. The enormity of what lay ahead was daunting, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She turned to Maria, who had remained quietly in the corner throughout the meeting. "Draft the announcement," Olivia said. "We're going public with this. It's the only way to rebuild trust, with our employees and with the public." Maria nodded, her expression reflecting a mix of pride and determination. "I'll take care of it." As the door closed behind Maria, Olivia allowed herself a brief moment of stillness. The battle was far from over, but she had made her choice. Skyline Airways would face the truth, no matter the cost. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation as reporters, industry professionals, and Skyline Airways employees filled the company's largest auditorium. Cameras were set up at strategic angles, their lenses trained on the stage where Olivia Bennett was about to make a public statement. The air was thick with tension, speculation rippling through the crowd about the revelations she was expected to unveil. Olivia stood backstage, her hands resting lightly on the podium that would soon carry her voice. She glanced over at Maria, who offered her a brief but encouraging nod. Despite the storm of nerves swirling inside her, Olivia's expression remained calm and composed. She had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, knowing it would define not only her leadership, but the future of Skyline Airways. A staff member signaled that it was time, and Olivia stepped onto the stage to a flurry of camera flashes. The murmurs in the room quieted as she approached the microphone. She took a breath and began, her voice steady but firm. "Good morning. Thank you all for being here," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "Today I am addressing an issue that strikes at the very heart of what Skyline Airways stands for: integrity, safety, and trust. These are not just words on a mission statement. They are the foundation of this company and the reason we exist." The audience was silent, their attention rapt. Olivia continued, her tone unwavering. "Recently, it has come to my attention that certain individuals within our organization have violated these core principles. Evidence has been uncovered of training record falsifications, safety protocol violations, and attempts to conceal these actions. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that puts the reputation of Skyline Airways and the safety of our passengers at risk." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by the frantic clicking of keyboards as reporters rushed to capture her words. Olivia didn't flinch. "As of today, the individuals directly involved in these actions have been suspended pending further investigation," she announced. "This includes several members of our pilot team. While I cannot share all the details at this time, I want to assure you that Skyline Airways is cooperating fully with industry regulators and authorities to ensure transparency and accountability." From his place in the crowd, Mark sat stiffly, his jaw clenched as Olivia spoke. His name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. He could feel the stares from colleagues around him, their whispered suspicions growing louder in his mind. As the press conference drew to a close, Olivia reaffirmed her commitment to restoring trust. "Skyline Airways will not tolerate behavior that undermines our values. We are taking immediate steps to strengthen our compliance measures and prevent this from ever happening again. To our passengers, our employees, and the aviation community, I want to say this: Skyline Airways will always put safety and integrity above all else." The room erupted into a flurry of questions as Olivia stepped away from the podium. Flashes continued to burst as reporters shouted, hoping for more details, but she didn't linger. She exited the stage with Maria close behind, leaving the auditorium in a controlled wave of chaos. Back in her office, Olivia barely had time to exhale before Maria entered, her phone in hand. "You need to see this," Maria said, handing Olivia the screen. It was an online statement from Mark. "Skyline Airways is using me as a scapegoat to cover up systemic issues," he had written. "I won't stand by while they ruin my career to protect their own image. I will fight this and expose the real problems within this company." Olivia set the phone down, her jaw tightening. "So, he's taking it public," she said. Maria nodded. "It's gaining traction. Some employees are starting to side with him, saying this is all a witch hunt." Olivia rubbed her temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As much as she had prepared for backlash, it still stung to see the narrative slipping out of her control. The boardroom dynamics didn't help. Half the leadership team had already expressed doubts about her approach, citing concerns about the company's image and employee morale. "How's the board reacting?" Olivia asked. "They're divided," Maria said. "Some are backing you, but others are skeptical. They're worried this could damage the company more than the violations themselves." Olivia leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the city skyline outside her window. The path she had chosen felt lonelier than ever, but she knew turning back wasn't an option. Her leadership and everything she had built depended on seeing this through. Before she could respond, a knock came at the door. Maria opened it to find a journalist standing there, a badge slung around his neck. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice low. "May I have a moment? I have information that might be relevant to your investigation." Olivia gestured for him to enter, intrigued but cautious. "Go on," she said. The journalist handed her a file. "This concerns Mark Andrews. About a year ago, there was a minor incident involving one of his flights, something that was quietly buried. I think you'll find this interesting." Olivia opened the file and scanned its contents. Her stomach tightened as she read. The report detailed a mechanical issue that had occurred during one of Mark's landings. While officially attributed to equipment failure, the maintenance log suggested otherwise: pilot error. Mark's actions had caused the malfunction, but the incident had been erased from public records. "Why wasn't this reported?" Olivia asked, her voice sharp. "That's the question," the journalist replied. "But I think you know who might have the answer." Olivia closed the file, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Mark's arrogance or Langston's complicity. This was about lives being put at risk for the sake of convenience, and it went deeper than she had realized. As the journalist left, Olivia turned to Maria. "We need to act fast," she said. "If this gets out before we've addressed it, the fallout could be catastrophic." Maria nodded. "What's the plan?" Olivia's gaze was steely. "We go deeper. No more half measures. This ends now." Maria sat in the archives room of Skyline Airways, surrounded by stacks of dusty files and glowing computer monitors. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard as she accessed old records buried deep within the company's database. Each click seemed to uncover another layer of deceit. Finally, she paused, her eyes fixed on a report that stood out among the sea of documents. Her breath hitched as the pieces began to fall into place. She grabbed the printed report and stormed into Olivia's office without knocking. Olivia, seated at her desk, looked up sharply, her expression shifting to concern when she saw Maria's face. "You need to see this," Maria said, handing over the papers. Olivia took the report, her brow furrowing as she scanned the details. It didn't take long for her to realize the gravity of what she was holding. "Mark falsified his flight hours," Maria explained. "He reported over 300 hours of flight time he never actually completed, and that's how he passed his certification exams. But it doesn't stop there." Olivia's eyes snapped up. "What else?" Maria pointed to a second section of the report. "Remember that minor incident the journalist mentioned? The one that was attributed to mechanical failure? It wasn't mechanical, it was pilot error, Mark's error, and it was swept under the rug because Langston signed off on a falsified maintenance report. This wasn't just negligence, Olivia. It was intentional." Olivia leaned back in her chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. Her company, the one she had fought so hard to build into a beacon of trust and safety, was harboring a network of deceit. "How many people know about this?" she asked quietly. "Not many," Maria said. "But if this leaks before we address it, it'll be catastrophic. The press is already circling after the last announcement." Olivia's jaw tightened. She knew Maria was right. The fallout from these revelations could devastate Skyline Airways. But the alternative, continuing to bury the truth, was unthinkable. "We need to act," Olivia said, "and we need to act now." The next day, Olivia found herself standing before the board of directors, her usual composure replaced by a steely determination. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations and suspicions. "Gentlemen," Olivia began, her voice unwavering, "we have a crisis on our hands, and I'm here to make it clear that this crisis will not define Skyline Airways, but how we respond to it will." She laid the documents Maria had uncovered on the table in front of her. The board members exchanged uneasy glances as they skimmed the papers, their expressions ranging from shock to denial. "This is evidence," Olivia continued, "that one of our senior pilots falsified his credentials to pass certification exams. It's also evidence that a member of this very board covered up his actions, allowing him to continue flying despite a history of endangering passengers." David Langston, seated near the end of the table, bristled but said nothing. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by a stiffness that didn't go unnoticed. "Are you accusing someone on this board of misconduct?" one of the directors asked, his tone defensive. "I'm not accusing anyone," Olivia said firmly. "I'm presenting facts, and the facts speak for themselves." The room fell into uneasy silence. Meanwhile, Mark was far from silent. As Olivia navigated the internal fallout, He ramped up his public campaign against her. Interviews with sympathetic media outlets, scathing social media posts, and carefully placed leaks painted him as a victim of corporate scapegoating. Skyline Airways is throwing me under the bus to distract from their own failures, Mark said in one particularly damning interview. They're using me as a pawn to protect their reputation, but the truth will come out. Olivia watched the interview from her office, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He's trying to weaponize public opinion, she said to Maria, who stood nearby. And it's working, Maria replied grimly. The employees are divided. Some think he's lying, but others are starting to believe him. Morale is shaky at best. Olivia exhaled sharply, her resolve hardening. Then we need to get ahead of this before it spirals further. That evening, Olivia called an emergency meeting with the company's senior leadership and legal team. The conference room was filled with tense faces, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. We have no choice, Olivia said, addressing the room. The evidence we've uncovered will be handed over to the FAA and other regulatory authorities. Skyline Airways will fully cooperate with their investigations. Murmurs of concern spread through the room. This will destroy us, one executive said, shaking his head. If this goes public, we'll lose our customers, our investors, everything. No, Olivia countered, her voice sharp. What will destroy us is continuing to hide the truth. If we want to rebuild trust, we have to start by being honest. That's non-negotiable. She turned to the head of the legal team. Prepare the documents for submission and draft a statement for the press. We're not waiting for this to leak. We're going to own the narrative. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, one of the directors spoke up. If this is the course you're choosing, Olivia, you need to be prepared for the fallout. I am, she said simply. Later that night, as Olivia sat in her office reviewing the final details of the statement, Maria walked in holding a fresh set of documents. I found something else, Maria said. These are older maintenance reports tied to flights Mark piloted. The pattern goes back years, Olivia, and Langston isn't the only one who signed off on them. There's a network here, one that's been operating under the radar for far too long. Olivia took the documents, her stomach twisting as she realized just how deep the rot went. This isn't just about Skyline, she said quietly. This is about the entire industry. If we don't expose this, it'll keep happening, here and everywhere else. Maria nodded, her expression grim but resolute. What's the next move? Olivia looked up, her gaze steady. We blow it wide open. The conference room was filled with tension, the air thick with the weight of impending consequences. Olivia stood at the head of the long table, facing the skeptical gazes of the Skyline Airways board of directors. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright defiance, but Olivia's resolve was unshaken. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white but her voice calm and clear. We have reached a point of no return, she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. This company is standing at a crossroads. We can continue to fight among ourselves, hide behind excuses, and let this corruption fester. Or we can take the harder path, the right path, and confront this head-on. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances, but Olivia pressed on. The evidence is undeniable, she said, motioning to the stack of files in front of her. Falsified records, covered-up incidents, and a complete disregard for passenger safety. And it goes beyond Mark Andrews. The complicity within this organization has allowed these violations to persist. If we don't act now, Skyline Airways will lose everything. Our reputation, our trust, and our future. One of the board members, a man named Gerald Foster, leaned forward, his voice skeptical. Olivia, do you realize what you're asking us to do? Turning this over to the authorities and the media will destroy us. The public backlash alone could bankrupt this company. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Gerald, do you think keeping this buried will save us? When, not if, this comes to light, the fallout will be far worse if we're seen as complicit. Transparency is the only way forward. The room fell silent. Olivia could feel the resistance softening, but the final push was still ahead. I'm not asking for blind loyalty, Olivia continued, her tone softening but retaining its strength. I'm asking you to believe in what this company stands for. We built Skyline Airways on the promise of integrity, safety, and accountability. It's time to prove that those values aren't just words on paper. A few heads nodded slowly. Maria, standing quietly in the corner, caught Olivia's eye and gave a small, encouraging smile. Finally, Gerald sighed. All right, Olivia, I'm with you, but this won't be easy. It never is, Olivia replied, her voice steady. But it's necessary. Within hours, the plan was set in motion. Olivia coordinated with the legal team to compile the evidence, preparing to hand it over to the Federal Aviation Administration and other regulatory bodies. A press release was drafted, outlining Skyline Airways' commitment to transparency and the steps being taken to rectify the issues. As the news broke, the fallout was immediate. Headlines splashed across screens and papers. Skyline Airways exposes internal corruption. Pilot scandal rocks leading airline. And CEO Olivia Bennett takes bold stand against negligence. Mark Andrews, however, wasn't going down quietly. From his lawyer's office, he continued his public attacks on Olivia, painting her as a tyrant who was using him as a scapegoat. This is a witch hunt, he declared in a televised interview. They're targeting me to distract from their own failures. I'll fight this every step of the way. Behind the scenes, the investigation into Mark and his associates unearthed even more damning evidence. Mark had not only falsified his flight hours, but had also manipulated performance evaluations for other pilots, creating a network of mutual protection. As the net tightened around him, cracks began to appear in his facade. The turning point came late one night when Olivia received an urgent call from Maria. Olivia, Maria said, her voice taut with urgency. Mark's trying to leave the country. Security at the airport flagged him. Olivia's grip on the phone tightened. Where is he now? They've detained him at the international terminal, Maria replied. He was using a fake passport. Olivia exhaled sharply, her mind racing. I'm on my way. By the time Olivia arrived at the airport, Mark was being escorted away by federal agents. His once confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a look of defeat. Olivia stood at a distance, watching as the man who had caused so much harm was finally held accountable. As the agents led Mark out of sight, Maria approached Olivia. They found the fake passport, as well as documents linking him to several other incidents we hadn't uncovered yet, she said. This should close the case against him. Olivia nodded, her expression unreadable. It's not just about him, Maria. We have to make sure this never happens again. Not here, not anywhere. Maria placed a hand on her shoulder. We will. You've already started that process. The next morning, Skyline Airways issued a formal statement announcing Mark's arrest and the company's full cooperation with the ongoing investigation. The response from the public was mixed. While some criticized the airline for allowing the issues to persist, many applauded Olivia's decision to come forward and take decisive action. In a follow-up press conference, Olivia addressed the lingering concerns. This has been one of the most challenging periods in Skyline Airways history, she said, but challenges like these reveal who we truly are. And what we stand for is clear: accountability, integrity, and a commitment to doing what's right, no matter the cost. We will not shy away from the truth, and we will not allow this company to become complacent. This is our promise to our passengers, our employees, and the industry as a whole. Her words resonated, sparking a wave of support from employees who had doubted her resolve. The leadership team, now stripped of those complicit in the scandal, began working with renewed focus to rebuild the company's reputation. Olivia knew the battle wasn't over, but she felt a glimmer of hope. The hardest decisions had been made, and Skyline Airways was on the path to redemption. The sharp glare of the camera lights beamed down on Olivia Bennett as she sat across from a seasoned news anchor in a studio buzzing with anticipation. The room was sterile yet charged, each person behind the scenes acutely aware of the weight this interview carried. Olivia adjusted her posture, her composed exterior concealing the fire that burned within her. She was ready to face the storm. Ms. Bennett, the anchor began, his tone polished yet probing. The revelations about Skyline Airways have rocked the aviation industry. With your company at the center of scrutiny, many are questioning whether you acted too late. How do you respond to those criticisms? Olivia met his gaze, her voice unwavering. We acted the moment we had concrete evidence. While I understand the frustration and disappointment some may feel, my focus is on ensuring transparency and accountability moving forward. No organization is immune to missteps, but it's how we respond to those missteps that defines us. The anchor leaned forward. But some would say your actions have divided your workforce. There's been public outcry, and reports suggest that a faction of employees believes you've overreached, even accusing you of discrimination. How do you address those concerns? Olivia's expression hardened, but her tone remained measured. Let me be clear. No one is above the law. The actions we've taken were not based on personal vendettas or favoritism. They were based on facts, on evidence that certain individuals endangered lives and undermined our values. My responsibility as CEO is to protect our passengers, our employees, and the integrity of Skyline Airways. That means making difficult decisions, even when they're unpopular. Outside the Skyline Airways headquarters, a small group of employees had gathered, holding signs with phrases like, "Stop the scapegoating," and "Justice for Mark." Their voices were loud, their chants echoing through the downtown streets. While the group was relatively small, their presence attracted media attention, amplifying the perception of division within the company. Inside, Olivia watched the coverage from her office, her jaw tight as she listened to the chants. "This isn't about justice," she said to Maria, who stood beside her. "It's about deflection. Mark's supporters are clinging to his narrative because they're afraid of what accountability means for them." Maria nodded. "The noise is distracting, but the majority of employees understand what you're doing. They see the bigger picture." "That's what I'm counting on," Olivia replied. "But we need to shift the narrative before this spirals further." The tension reached its peak when Olivia announced a live press conference to outline Skyline Airways' path forward. The auditorium was filled with reporters, employees, and industry professionals, all waiting to hear how she intended to salvage the company's reputation. As Olivia stepped onto the stage, the room quieted. Her presence commanded attention, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around the company. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady. "The past weeks have been some of the most challenging in Skyline Airways history. We have faced allegations, revelations, and scrutiny that have tested the very core of our organization." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But with these challenges comes an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to reaffirm our values, and to ensure that something like this never happens again." Olivia took a breath, her next words deliberate. "Effective immediately, Skyline Airways will implement sweeping changes to our hiring practices, compliance protocols, and internal oversight. These changes include mandatory third-party audits, enhanced training requirements for all employees, and the establishment of an independent ethics committee to oversee company operations." The room erupted in murmurs, reporters scrambling to type as Olivia continued. "These reforms are not just about addressing the issues of the past, they are about building a future where every passenger, every employee, and every partner can trust Skyline Airways to uphold the highest standards of safety and integrity." She turned her attention to the camera, addressing the public directly. "To our passengers, I understand that trust has been shaken. I want you to know that we are taking every step necessary to earn it back. To our employees, I know this has been a difficult time, but I believe in your dedication and your resilience. Together, we will emerge stronger." The room erupted into applause, a few hesitant at first but growing as her words settled in. Olivia stepped away from the podium, her heart pounding but her expression calm. She had made her stand. As the day ended, Olivia returned to her office, exhausted but resolute. The protests outside had dwindled, the chants replaced by the hum of the city settling into night. Maria entered, a small smile on her face. "You did well," Maria said. "The feedback is already shifting. People are starting to see the bigger picture." Olivia nodded, her gaze focused on the city skyline. "This isn't the end, Maria, but it's a start." Mark Andrews sat in the dimly lit holding room, his once confident demeanor replaced by a quiet tension. The walls were bare, and the clock on the wall seemed louder with every tick. He stared at the table in front of him, his jaw tight, knowing that the walls were closing in. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was running out of options. When the door finally opened, Olivia Bennett walked in, her expression as composed as ever. She carried herself with the same quiet authority that had defined her career, and Mark hated how much it unnerved him. He looked up at her, trying to summon the bravado he was known for, but her gaze cut through him like a knife. "Mark," Olivia began, her tone cool and measured, "you requested this meeting. What do you want?" Mark leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "Look, Olivia, we both know how this is going to end. The media's already out for blood, and if this goes to trial, it's going to drag the company's name through the mud. Skyline doesn't need that. You don't need that." Olivia raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Go on." "I'm saying we can make this go away," Mark continued. "I'll take responsibility for some of it. Not all, but enough to satisfy the authorities. In exchange, you keep the rest of it quiet. No need to dig deeper, no need to involve more people. The company's reputation stays intact, and we can both move on." Olivia's expression didn't change. She crossed her arms, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharper now. "You want me to ignore the lives you've endangered? The trust you've broken? You think I'd trade the integrity of this company to protect your lies?" Mark's smirk faltered, but he pressed on. "I'm trying to help you, Olivia. Do you really think the public cares about the details? They just want a scapegoat, and I'm already in their crosshairs. Let me be the bad guy. Just don't take everyone else down with me." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to dictate how this ends, Mark. You've lied, cheated, and endangered countless lives. I will not compromise on the truth. Not for you, not for anyone. If you thought for a second that I'd be intimidated by your threats or swayed by your offers, you don't know me at all." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Olivia cut him off. "This meeting is over. I'll see you in court." The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as the proceedings began. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised to capture every detail, while employees and industry professionals watched from the gallery. Olivia sat at the front, her posture straight and her expression resolute. She wasn't just there as CEO, she was there as a witness to the truth. Mark was brought in, his hands cuffed and his face pale. The air seemed to shift as the evidence against him was presented. The prosecutor detailed the falsified flight hours, the forged maintenance reports, and the culture of complicity that had allowed Mark to operate unchecked for years. One by one, witnesses testified, former colleagues, investigators, and even some of Mark's former allies, who had turned on him in exchange for leniency. Each piece of testimony painted a damning picture of a man who had prioritized his ambition over the safety of others. When it was Olivia's turn to take the stand, the room fell silent. She adjusted the microphone, her gaze steady as she addressed the court. "Skyline Airways was built on the principles of safety, integrity, and trust," she began. "These principles are not negotiable, and they are not optional. What Mark Andrews did was a betrayal of those principles, and it put lives at risk. As CEO, it is my responsibility to ensure that every passenger who steps onto one of our planes can trust us to uphold the highest standards of safety and professionalism. That trust was broken, and it is my job to rebuild it." She paused, letting her words sink in. This trial is not just about Mark Andrews. It is about holding everyone accountable, myself included, for allowing a culture of complacency to take root. I stand here today to say that we will do better, and that starts with telling the truth. Her testimony was met with murmurs of approval from the gallery, and even the judge seemed to regard her with respect. By the time the trial concluded, the evidence against Mark was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before delivering their verdict, guilty on all counts. Mark was sentenced to several years in prison, his career and reputation in ruins. As the court adjourned, Olivia stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. Reporters swarmed her, shouting questions, but she ignored them, her focus unwavering. Maria was waiting for her near the car, a small smile on her face. "You did it," Maria said. "The hardest part is over." Olivia nodded, though her expression remained somber. "It's not about winning, Maria. It's about doing what's right. And there's still so much work to be done." Maria placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've already taken the first step. The rest will follow." As they drove away, Olivia allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The trial had been a battle, but it wasn't the war. Rebuilding trust, transforming the company culture, and ensuring that Skyline Airways lived up to its values. That was the real challenge. But she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth had prevailed, and with it came the chance to start anew. The courtroom's verdict was a thunderous conclusion to weeks of intense scrutiny and revelations. Mark Andrews and his co-conspirators were sentenced to prison for their roles in falsifying records, endangering lives, and undermining the integrity of Skyline Airways. The ripple effect of the trial extended beyond the pilot's sentencing. David Langston, the complicit board member who had enabled Mark's actions for years, was forced to resign and now faced his own legal challenges. The message was clear. No one was above accountability. For Olivia Bennett, however, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. As she walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her. She stopped for a moment, raising a hand to signal that she would speak. "Today's verdict is not a victory," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's a necessary step toward justice. This outcome is a reminder that integrity must always take precedence over convenience, and that accountability is the cornerstone of trust. Skyline Airways is committed to rebuilding that trust, starting from within." Her words reverberated across news channels and social media, sparking conversations about corporate accountability and ethics in industries beyond aviation. But for Olivia, the real work lay ahead. A week later, Olivia stood at the podium in Skyline Airways' largest conference hall, facing an audience of employees, shareholders, and media representatives. Behind her, a banner hung with the words, "A New Flight Path, Rebuilding Trust Together." The room buzzed with anticipation, the crowd eager to hear how Skyline would chart its future after the turbulence of recent weeks. Olivia adjusted the microphone and began. "Good morning. Over the past few months, Skyline Airways has been at the center of one of the most challenging periods in our history. We've faced hard truths about our organization. Truths that forced us to confront not only the actions of individuals, but also the culture that allowed those actions to go unchecked." She paused, her gaze scanning the room. But challenges, as painful as they are, present opportunities. Opportunities to grow, to change, and to set a higher standard. That's why I stand here today, not to dwell on the past, but to outline the steps we're taking to ensure a brighter future for Skyline Airways. A presentation appeared on the large screen behind her, detailing the sweeping reforms the company was enacting. Olivia gestured toward the screen as she spoke. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a comprehensive overhaul of our personnel management systems. This includes enhanced training protocols, stricter certification verification processes, and mandatory third-party audits for all safety and compliance records." She turned back to the audience, her expression resolute. "Additionally, we are establishing an independent oversight committee to ensure that our leadership remains accountable to the highest standards of integrity. This committee will include external experts and representatives from our workforce to ensure transparency and inclusivity." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Then Olivia delivered the heart of her message. "This is more than a policy change. It's a cultural shift. Skyline Airways will be a company that values honesty over shortcuts, safety over profits, and people over bureaucracy. This is the standard we are setting, not just for ourselves, but as an example for the entire industry." Later that evening, as Olivia sat in her office reviewing the day's events, an email notification appeared on her screen. It was from an aviation safety advocacy group, praising Skyline Airways for its transparency and inviting Olivia to speak at an upcoming industry summit about the lessons learned from the scandal. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the past few months pressing against her. While the reforms and public statements were necessary, Olivia knew the deeper change, the cultural transformation she envisioned, would take time, persistence, and unwavering resolve. The skyline of Atlanta stretched before her, glittering against the darkening sky. For the first time in weeks, Olivia allowed herself a small smile. Skyline Airways had weathered the storm, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, she knew the company was on a better path, one built on the foundation of truth and accountability. This wasn't just a lesson for her company, it was a lesson for every organization that valued profit over principles. And Olivia was determined to ensure that Skyline's recovery would serve as an example of how to lead with integrity, even in the face of adversity. Olivia stood in her office. The familiar view of the Atlanta skyline stretched out before her. The city glimmered in the late afternoon light, a reflection of hope and resilience. The storm had passed, or at least the worst of it. Yet as she stared out at the horizon, a sense of lingering unease clung to her thoughts. She knew that while the public reckoning had concluded, her responsibilities had only grown heavier. The verdicts against Mark Andrews and his group of complicit pilots had dominated the headlines for weeks. Mark, the once arrogant senior pilot who had scoffed at accountability, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for falsifying records, endangering passengers, and undermining the integrity of the aviation industry. His co-conspirators faced similar fates, their roles in the scandal meticulously laid bare during the trial. The fallout didn't stop there. David Langston, the former board member whose complacency and cover-ups had allowed the corruption to thrive, had resigned in disgrace. He now faced his own legal battles, a public symbol of what happens when power is wielded without accountability. For Olivia, seeing justice served brought a sense of relief, but it was far from a victory lap. As the days unfolded, the ripple effects of the scandal became evident across Skyline Airways. Olivia had spearheaded the company's reform efforts with an unwavering focus on transparency and change. New regulations were implemented, ensuring stricter oversight of hiring processes, certification verifications, and compliance audits. To her surprise, the changes were met with unexpected enthusiasm from many employees. Some who had initially been critical of Olivia's decisions now openly expressed their support, acknowledging the clarity and direction her leadership had brought. At team meetings and town halls, employees shared stories of how the reforms had made them feel safer and more valued as part of the organization. "I wasn't sure about all this at first," one ground crew supervisor admitted during a meeting, "but seeing the difference it's already making, it feels like we're part of something better now." The feedback buoyed Olivia's spirit, though she remained pragmatic. She knew trust was fragile, and regaining it required consistent action, not just words. The public's reaction to Skyline's transformation was another source of cautious optimism. Customers, initially skeptical, began to respond positively to the airline's renewed focus on safety and integrity. Surveys showed increasing customer satisfaction, and the airline's bookings gradually climbed back to pre-scandal levels. For many passengers, Olivia's public acknowledgement of the company's failings and her commitment to transparency had struck a chord. Olivia issued a statement in response, emphasizing the broader lessons of the scandal. "No individual or organization is above accountability," she wrote. "This experience has taught us that transparency and respect are not just values to aspire to. They are non-negotiable. They are the foundation upon which trust is built. And without trust, there can be no success." The statement was widely shared, earning praise from industry leaders and advocacy groups alike. It marked a turning point for Skyline, signaling not just recovery but a commitment to lead by example. While Olivia found solace in these signs of progress, she remained acutely aware of the work that still lay ahead. In the wake of the scandal, she had set a new goal: to create a culture within Skyline Airways that prioritized equality and safety, not as slogans, but as lived experiences. To that end, Olivia began working on a new initiative, one that would establish mentorship programs, leadership training for underrepresented groups, and anonymous reporting mechanisms to empower employees at all levels to speak up without fear of retaliation. She shared the vision with Maria one afternoon. "We can't just repair what's broken," Olivia said. "We have to build something better. A workplace where everyone feels seen, respected, and safe." Maria smiled. "If anyone can make that happen, it's you. You've already proven it." In the end, Olivia Bennett's journey reminds us that true leadership isn't about avoiding challenges, but facing them head-on with integrity and courage. It's a testament to the power of transparency, accountability, and the unyielding commitment to doing what's right, even when it's difficult. As Olivia said, challenges will come, but our integrity will always be our compass. What would you do if your values were tested in the face of adversity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and inspiration. See you in the next one.